All right, let's dive right into this explainer. So, when you hear the name King Arthur, you probably immediately picture a very specific guy, right? A noble king, shiny armor, pulling a sword from a stone. But here's the wild part. The Arthur of popular culture is actually a massive composite character. He's been built piece by piece, generation by generation. Depending completely on the origin of the story and who exactly was doing the telling, Arthur has been radically reinvented to serve the exact needs of his era.
What if I told you that the classic knight in shining armor we all know is a total invention, and that the original Arthur wasn't even a king at all? I know, it sounds totally counterintuitive. King Arthur, not a king? But as we dig into the historical and literary records, we find that the very foundation of this legend is built on some seriously shifting sands.
To see how this happened, we're going to trace Arthur's evolution through 5 distinct origins: the British warlord, the Welsh monster hunter, Joffrey's imperial king, the French romance king, and finally, the once and future legend.
Section 1. The Historical British Warlord. Sub-Roman Britain's Defender.
Okay, so our story kicks off way back in the late 5th and early 6th century. Rome has just abandoned Britain, it's absolute chaos, and native Britons are desperately defending their lands against invading Anglo-Saxons. If a real Arthur existed, this is when he fought. But here's where it gets tricky. The famous Battle of Badon happened roughly between the years 500 and 550, but the earliest texts that actually name Arthur, like the Historia Brittonum and the Annales Cambriae, weren't written down until the 9th and 10th centuries. That is a massive 300-year gap between the man and the written record.
Now here's where it gets really fascinating. These early texts, they go out of their way not to call him a king. No rex here. Instead, they use the term dux bellorum. Basically, that translates to a leader of wars, or a gritty military warlord. He was a frontline soldier getting his hands dirty, definitely not a monarch sitting back on a golden throne.
And apparently, this guy was an absolute terror on the battlefield. I mean, the Historia Brittonum literally claims he single-handedly killed 960 men at the Battle of Badon. 960. Now, whether you buy that crazy kill count or not, the core takeaway is clear. The original British origin of Arthur was purely military. He was a ruthless, tactical defender of his people against foreign invaders.
Section 2. The Welsh Monster Hunter. Myths, Magic, and Pre-Galphrygian Folklore.
So as we move away from this gritty pseudo-history and into Welsh mythology, Arthur morphs into something completely different, a superhuman protector against terrifying, supernatural threats. Over the centuries, storytellers in Wales took the historical warlord and just soaked him in their own rich, magical traditions. In what academics call pre-Galphrydian traditions, which is just a fancy way of saying the stories that existed before a guy named Geoffrey of Monmouth rewrote the history in the 12th century, Arthur was a localized, magical folk hero. He led a band of superhuman heroes in the wild and even hung out with former pagan gods. So this version of Arthur, he definitely wasn't politely jousting in tournaments. No way. He was out there rapidly battling an insane lineup of enemies. We're talking giant cat monsters like the Cath Palug, destructive divine boars called the Tirts Tweeth, dogheads, witches, giants, the whole shebang. This Welsh origin gave us an Arthur who was a ferociously active monster hunter, literally laughing as he slaughtered supernatural beasts to protect his island.
Section 3. Geoffrey's Imperial King, the 1130s Megamyth.
Then, everything changes in the 1130s. A writer named Geoffrey of Monmouth comes along and basically invents the modern Arthurian framework out of thin air. With his book, The History of the Kings of Britain, Geoffrey grabs the Welsh monster hunter and the British warlord and elevates him to the grandest possible stage. He maps out the narrative we all recognize today: Arthur's conception at Tintagel, the wizard Merlin as his guide, and an Arthur who doesn't just defeat the Saxons but conquers a vast empire, even taking on the Romans. He also introduces the betrayal by Mordred and Arthur's final rest in the magical Isle of Avalon.
Geoffrey essentially transformed Arthur into this vast imperial conqueror, giving the British a hero to rival the great emperors of history. But honestly, even back then, people were side-eyeing this. Contemporary critics, like the historian William of Newburgh, absolutely roasted Geoffrey, saying he made the whole thing up through an inordinate love of lying. Hilarious, right? But whether it was true or a total fabrication, the megamyth was born, and it spread like wildfire across Europe.
Section 4. The French Romance King. Camelot, Chivalry, and the Cuckold.
All right, let's jump to the 12th and 13th centuries. As Arthur's tales cross over into France, his character undergoes a dramatic and honestly kind of unexpected weakening. The French writers loved the Arthurian setting, for sure, but they had very different cultural values than the Welsh or the British. The fierce, giant-killing warrior gets replaced by what the French called the roi-fainéant Nant, literally a do-nothing king. This is a massive shift based purely on the story's new geographic origin. Instead of leading the charge, this French Arthur kind of just sits back at court, occasionally falling asleep at feasts while his younger, cooler knights go out on all the magical adventures.
French writers like Chrétien de Troyes added the stuff we all know today, the dazzling court of Camelot, the epic quest for the Holy Grail with Percival and Galahad, and, crucially, Sir Lancelot. By introducing Lancelot's whole affair with Queen Guinevere, these French romances effectively sidelined Arthur in his own legend, turning him into a tragic cuckold. He's still a figure of immense dignity, sure, but he is definitely no longer the main character of his own story.
Section 5. The Once and Future Legend. From Mallory to Modern Day.
After the Middle Ages, people kind of stopped believing Arthur was a real historical guy, and the legend faded. Sometimes he was literally just a punchline in comedic plays about characters like Tom Thumb. But of course, the myth was eventually saved and reshaped yet again. Thomas Malory consolidated those sprawling French romances into a single epic in 1485. And then, jumping ahead to the 19th century Victorian era, writers like Alfred Lord Tennyson brought him roaring back, but not as a warlord and not as a cuckold. Tennyson revived Arthur as a powerful symbol of ideal, moral manhood, basically the perfect chivalric gentleman for the Victorian age.
And this, right here, brilliantly illustrates how Arthur is the ultimate cultural shapeshifter. I mean, the origin of the storyteller completely dictates the version of Arthur we get. He fundamentally transforms from a gritty early British military defender to a Welsh supernatural monster hunter, to Joffrey's imperial ruler, to the passive French romance king, and finally to a Victorian moral ideal. He is literally whoever we need him to be.
Which leaves us with one final thought to chew on. The old legends say Arthur is sleeping in Avalon, just waiting to return when Britain needs him most. But honestly, based on everything we've just uncovered, maybe his true immortality isn't a physical return at all. Maybe his absolute superpower is his endless ability to evolve. So what version of King Arthur will the next generation invent? Keep that in mind the next time you see a new movie or read a new book about the once and future king. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the legends.